Welcome back to the AI Driven Marketer. I'm Dan Sanchez. My friends call me Danchez. And on this show, I am attempting to master AI in 2024. That's kind of been the journey. And along the way, I'm hoping to help you, the other marketers out there, follow along with me, learn how to leverage AI to do more with less, but yet do greater, like have a greater sense of quality of what we're doing, and not just producing more commodity content or more bad results, but actually producing better results with AI. Today, I'm excited because I'm having a friend on. His name is Craig Nelson, and he was a leader in the revenue enablement space for years and is now jumping into a new endeavor using AI in order to help sales team do more with less. And because marketing and sales, we always got to stay aligned and try to help each other figure out what we're doing. Craig, I'm so excited to have you on in order to dive into how you're introducing AI to teams in order to help teams become more effective with AI. So welcome to the show.
Dan, thanks for having me and thanks for your insight on this topic. It's been great working with you on it.
So we were jumping into the pre-call, and sometimes we end up in a pre-call right before the podcast, before I tap that record, where we end up talking. I'm like, I should have pushed record already. And I had one of those moments with you just now. I feel like you and I can jam about AI for hours. And I think actually between all our phone calls, I think we have jammed for a few hours at least already.
Yeah, probably true.
But I'm excited. But I want to get a little backstory from you. Like, when did it start peaking for you in your mind that AI was the future and it was going to be a thing? When was that moment for you?
I think it was about a year ago. We were beginning to scale an organization and having to put in place some ways of doing business. How do you prepare for a sales call, execute, and then debrief from a sales call? But this time around, we didn't have the same kind of capital. In other words, we had to do more with less, to your point there. And so for us, it was, all right, let's go see what's available. Go out to YouTube. I found some of your stuff right away, went through your training classes right away. So call out and shout out to you on that because it really did kind of kickstart me. But I really looked at enablement over the last couple of decades and said, what if you could automate much of the things that we've been doing to scale sales and to do all the things that we're doing? Because we knew there was a better way of doing it specific to clients, but is there enough time in the day to get it done right? And then once we start leveraging AI, we really saw some differences.
I mean, I'm seeing a huge productivity just for my own personal tasks and my own projects that I have going on all the time. And I've automated a number of things. What I find at a lot of teams that I get exposed to, if I come in as a consultant, they're kind of dabbling with it. A few of them have it. Maybe even one of them has a paid account for ChatGPT, but they don't use it very often. What are you seeing where people are at with AI? And what are you usually recommending for a transition if they're pretty convinced that AI is going to be a big thing? How are you walking them from where they're at to where they should be going in a 30-day period?
Yeah, I think it's really early days. And you and I were just chatting just before we started the recording here on this point. I sat down with about 8 people at an organization that's in growth mode. So they're adding products, they're adding new locations. And I thought it was an excellent opportunity to come in and say, what if you could do all that, but with fewer resources, less effort, time, et cetera? And that was what caused the meeting. Got into the meeting, and the first sort of roundtable discussion was, what have you done with AI to date? And I was a little bit set back in that, personal use, sure, ChatGPT, free edition. There was only one individual in the group that had the paid for edition of ChatGPT 4. And that's fine, because we then kind of launched into, why is it that you haven't gone and progressed all that far? And Dan, I think there's a lot of worry and concern. Everything from the classic, is this going to take my job? And my response was, oh, AI is not going to take your job, but somebody who knows AI just may. And I think that resonated with the group, because that then sponsored all right, so we know we have to do this, but, and then I went around and said, what are your worries? And then in turn, what was interesting was that the concerns around, this firm is in finance, so regulatory compliance and such. But then the concern was, but what if we don't? And the big organizations do. So the concern wasn't as much, when we're going to do it, as how fast can we get started?
It's funny, is that phrase, that's not going to be AI takes your job. It's going to be someone who knows AI. Like, I've heard that phrase like at least 100 or 200 times over the last year. If you're in the AI community or you're listening to podcasts like this one right now, You've heard that phrase before. It's nothing new to you, but it's important to know that most people haven't. You're part of a select few that's actually digging into this early, and it is early days. Because even when I talk to some of my tech savvy friends, and these are people who like to automate stuff and like digging into tech tools, it's fun for them.
Yeah.
A lot of them still haven't dug in the deep end of AI yet. They're still doing the very, very basics, not very good prompts, don't get much out of AI, let alone the people who are lagging behind. Like, it is still extremely early days for AI, but I think it's accelerating. Do you feel like it's picking up a bit? I feel like there's a lot of interest and people are just now beginning to dig into it a bit.
I think the reason why I got a call back and I'm going back into this organization again in person, and I think that's a big deal for them at the moment, because you can read the room, is that once we address the elephant in the room, the whole thing about AI is it going to take my job? And then one individual's kind of funny story said, "Can I use that?" And I'm thinking to myself, I didn't come up with that one.
Yeah.
And so that said, they said, "Why don't you come back?" But the reason why we want you to come back is that we want to have a core group of people that prove this out. And then their question was, "What is it going to take? Is it going to take, a couple of quarters?" And I said, "I don't think so." And you and I were just talking about this. You can use AI in your normal course of business and not tell people around you. They'll see the results of your work. They'll see how fast you're coming back with it, how you iterate, in a much quicker fashion. So if you can show and demonstrate with a small team of people just the productivity gains, one of the topics you just talked about is, in that first month, what if you had 60 to 80 hours of your time back in your day? And there's, never been a time greater than now where we spend so much time internally with our teams and our staff and our tools internal. But what if we got 60 to 80 hours back? Would that be enough with, let's say, 3 to 5 people using AI technologies? Would that be enough to cause the company to say 2025, because it's not that far away, let's get going, right? Let's start this thing off. And once we get into that conversation, the discussion the next meeting is going to be, where do we start? Is the audience for this marketing? Is it sales? Is it customer success? Of course, my classic consulting kind of response was, depends.
Yep. Yep. So what are you seeing sales team leveraging it for the most right now? Like, what's the most effective places where sales team are going and applying AI?
Yeah, I think that if you look at pretty consistent use of AI with sellers that are onto this and have been onto it for the last year plus, so some of the latest AI models are just so good that it's their de facto standard for preparing for the call, executing the call, and then coming off of debriefing internally and then communicating with those clients. So if I'm a rep that has 3 calls a day, maybe not sometimes 5 calls a day, you can imagine that my productivity win will be immediate. It'll be the first week. So I think a use case that helps me do the customer facing work faster and better. And suddenly these clients are saying, all right, it's the end of the call. I've already got my action items. I've already got, in this case here, the pain points where you're trying to verify them with me. Imagine having that at the end of the call. And in fact, you can do that with AI today, where at the end, you'll have these things understood. So you're not just scheduling your next meeting. You've already got the topics for the next meeting. It's
Yep.
already played back to them. So I think before, during, and after the call is such an immediate no-brainer that use case is the obvious one.
Yep. Man, there's so many ways to accelerate it too. Even as you're talking about it, I'm like, oh yeah, if I were doing that, if I was having a very similarly formatted phone call where I know within a phone call we're going to be covering A, B, and C, and I'm going to get different answers, but I know I'm going to be covering these topics, I'd be building a custom GPT that's looking for A, B, and C, and then with instructions to like, okay, with this information from this phone call transcript, do this. With this information, do that, and with this information, do this next thing. And I want you to format it as an email with the action items and blah blah blah, whatever I need into it. Like every time I post in a transcript, I don't even need a prompt because I've built it into the GPT with the instructions, and it would just immediately write the email for me. It's a one and done. It's probably like a one use case GPT, but think about how much time you have. You don't even have to think about it. It's almost like having an assistant that goes in and does all the busy work for you. You just have to copy and paste the transcript over.
So you've got me smiling now, Dan, because as you and I go back and forth and talk about GPTs and custom GPTs and the workflow GPTs, just understand that the audiences that I've been talking to as of late, this is now, language they're not using yet. They're back to, I'm not even sure what AI model I'm using, Craig. So I'm not sure why you're asking the AI model. All I know is I've got this AI assistant that some distributor sold to me, and I'm getting started with it, and I'm using it for planning my travel. I'm using it for identifying restaurants. I mean, recipes, you name it. So it's been interesting because as you started to go into the details there, that is, certainly level 2 stuff. And what I'm finding is that if they find value in level 1 stuff, they'll get to 2. What we don't want them to do is to say, not for me, and then hand it over to somebody technical in their organization. Because I have seen that where they said, we got this new team, younger generation team. And I'm thinking, what does that mean? Well, they're more apt to use this. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not sure how that fares for me, but I love it. And, it's easier to be a critic than a creator. So to me, it was a natural. But I
Sometimes
think the
I've had
point
a
there
lot
being,
of,
go ahead.
I mean, I've had mixed ages on this podcast, and I've often had, I don't know, like people that aren't millennials actually crushing it when it comes to marketing automation and AI use on this show. So far, like maybe it leans younger, but I've noticed all ages from Gen Z, millennial, and up leveraging AI in really cool ways. At least I haven't noticed a difference. I think it's almost been equal as far as AI utilization. Maybe in some companies that leans differently. I don't really consider it to be an age thing though, because I've seen it so much across the board.
And I'll take another quote from an individual because I don't think it is an age thing. I think anybody who wants to do better and knows they need to do better for their clients, will gravitate towards it. What I think though it is, Dan, is it's time. And an individual, this is from a high tech firm, big capital raise. They're going to make that run, to that next level. So they've got so much going on in this organization. They're building and selling and marketing and deploying and doing it all over again. And then they start over again the next day, right? So these organizations are saying to me, it's not a matter of, generation, it's a matter of time. I just don't have the time to understand what are the high impact use cases, where do I start? What are the technologies? And you and I are now seeing this whole new map of vendor technologies. I shared one yesterday with somebody I've worked with for years, and his response was, I don't know one logo on that page. So, what are the AI technologies that I should be considering? And then in turn, how do I start? Because I don't want to put my company at risk. So these are pretty basic, objections, but they're not any objections you can't overcome. But I think it's time. If the individual doesn't have the time, the group doesn't have the time, it's going to be a slow go.
So what are some of the steps you're having people take initially in order to see success? Like where do you usually see people having their first wins?
I even go through, so I'm using today for the podcast today, I put together a list of my technologies. I have 8 that I'm using today, Dan. Now, do I use some more than others? Sure. But I use this for my schedule now. So doing scheduling at this point is done through AI. I am doing the messaging. I take the standard sort of company master messaging doc, and then I copy paste it, and through GPT I do. You taught me this, super prompt. Didn't even know that term until your video, and so I use that to do the messaging for it. And I say that just use this to get things booked on your schedule, to get things in this case done better when you're doing them. Then I pivoted a few weeks ago and I started using a prospect tool that does the outreach, not the calls, because you can't do that, at the moment, cold calling, using this kind of AI technology, but you can do the outreach, personalized outreach. So I've been doing that. And this goes well beyond the, do something every 3 days. This is well smarter than that. So I'm encouraging companies to start there, get some more meetings booked, be more efficient with those meetings. It's a good starting point because if I can demonstrate in that first month that you can save somebody 60, you said that might be a conservative number, 60 hours, and then at a bill rate of whatever it might
for a
be,
month. If you're
$3,500.
leveraging it well, it's easy to do that a month. And then what I'm really shooting for is like, can you do that in a week? Which you're like, well, but there's not 60 hours in a week. Yeah, but you can do more man hours. Like you can always add more people to a project. If you have 10 people in a week, you're getting to 400 hours. can you do more in a week than a normal human can do? That starts to become the game.
But even then, if you can introduce, I'm using Otter to give a shout out
Yep.
to them for my note taking. The reason being is that I've used different note taking technologies over the years, but this one's giving me insight during and after the call, and then it's helping me to do the follow up again, integrated with, and it's fun because these technologies work together. It's not just one you're using at any given time, right? You're using multiple. So that's what I'm doing myself at this point, and I'm encouraging people, show that $3,500 cost savings per person as fast as you can, because that's going to rationalize the $160 to $180 a month cost. And that's, these technologies are more reasonable than, the $60 to $80 per user per month. So they are more reasonable. But that said, they can add up. So you got to make sure that there's not too much overlay. Kind of pivoting a little bit, Dan, I want to get your take on this. So that's a very easy use case, right? Preparing and executing sales calls. What if you're a company that's in high growth mode? You just took capital and you're adding people in offices. Why not use AI to do everything from doing your job description to the questions you ask to, maybe the things you're going to expect in the first 90 days? Can't we use AI to basically scale the company? It's kind of a leading question, sorry.
Yeah,
But
I mean, of course
to
you
me, that's
can.
a big deal.
The question is, which parts do you want to scale? And I
Yeah.
think, when you go put your consultant hat on, you're like, well, but where do you start? You just can't apply it to everywhere all at once. You're like, well, where's your biggest bottleneck? Right? Where's this thing slowing you down from growing the most? Well, how can AI be leveraged to speed that up? Right? That's where you have to start asking. And AI can be used in so many different facets, from even ideating and better understanding the problem. So you think you understand the problem, but I guarantee you, like, if you articulate the problem to AI, it's one of my favorite things is to use the desktop app or the iPhone app for ChatGPT and turn on the microphone, not for the back and forth conversation, but just to record. And I just start talking. I'm like, okay, ChatGPT, here's the thing. And then I just like word vomit and just like tell it everything, like as if I was talking to a person. Like, here's the problem. Okay, here's all the context, here's the backstory, here's some of the constraints, here's my possible solution. Is there anything I'm missing? And then bam, its ability to like come up with some other considerations you should have thought about even to solve the problem is really handy. So it's great for ideation. It's almost a coaching or a consulting itself, if you just frame the problem well or open it up. Using it to automate things, I think, is the next. I actually came up with this model to talk about AI utilization way back earlier this year, in like steps you can use to measure like how much are you using AI, because you can use it as a one-to-one basis, like as an assistant, do this task, do that task, and then you can go up a level and start automating things. Every
Yeah.
time this form gets filled out, AI does X, Y, and Z. Instead of just normal marketing or sales automation, AI is put into it to be smarter, to hyper personalize content, maybe to email. You can use it then to level up in that utilization from one-to-one task, personal assistant, automation. You can use it for coaching. You can use it then another level up for forecasting. I think that's hard. I don't think a lot of people are doing that well yet. And then I have like one last level up where people, I think we will be using AI to come up with original value. Right now it's enhancing value, maybe personalizing value, but I don't think anybody's using AI to create original value within a company yet. I think there's possibilities of it though.
But I think it's that possibility that's going to cause companies to say, at the moment, we're going to put a few hours into this each week. I think you really have to look at having somebody be a lead within your organization right now. So somebody that is doing the job, interacting with clients, whether it be pre or post sales, doesn't matter, but interacting with clients, have them lead the charge because the productivity gain, no brainer. That's going to happen. You're going to get that 60 to 80 hours. It's just a matter of, when you're going to roll this out and how you're going to educate your team on it and make sure that, there's some guidelines around it. But what we're talking about now are the big deal items. And the conversation I had with a client that is both launching new products to increase revenue as well as launching new offices. And you start doing that discussion with GPT like you're doing right now, or whatever AI model, doesn't matter. The conversation can be repeated. So let's say the conversation is about hiring. This conversation is about going to market with this new product. There are lots of things you can use AI for right now to give you that first 80%. You still need to have somebody feeding it the right stuff. They have to understand the profile of who you're trying to hire,
Yep.
the product
Yep.
mix, the market in this case here that you're going to target in conjunction with AI. But you can do, big deal use cases. I refer to them as onboarding staff, launching new products, launching new offices. All of that work could be done. And then let's say you do it once. You do it for one city, for one product. Why wouldn't you
Yep.
repeat it the next time
Yep.
around? And that's the other part is that now this is further downstream. If you're doing this with your internal model and it's learning, can you imagine if no different than banks, they've grown over the years, right? They're just good at
Yep.
consolidating and moving
Yep.
forward, right? But what if you were in, whether it be finance or high tech or services, and the way you launched an office or a product was repeatable? And what if AI was learning along the way with you? Now, this is all internal stuff. This is stuff
Yep.
you feed the model, so to speak. Then in 12 months, it becomes this very strategic initiative, right? One in which you can actually look at analytics and behavior. The tools that I'm using now, I mentioned I'm using 8 different tools now. The amount of information that's going through those tools and the things that I'm doing day to day, imagine doing that with 5 people, 50 people, 500 people. Imagine how quickly this thing's going to learn. So the power of analytics, we've talked about this for many years, is now going to be realized because it's going to be reviewing it and then making decisions off it pretty much in real time, right? But you
Yeah.
still need somebody super smart to look at the results. You can't just take this stuff verbatim and run with it.
So I have a thought on the resume builder, and then another thought on training AI over time. We'll start with the resume builder.
Okay.
I love that idea because, man, building resumes is one of those things. I just, or not resumes, job posts,
Job
job
descriptions,
descriptions.
yeah.
It's like one of those things like you have to do as a leader because it's really critical. Like it's almost like a little mini ad for the thing you're trying to hire, right? You need to have it well defined, and if you don't have it well defined, then there's lack of clarity on what this role needs to do, and you might attract the wrong person with it. So it's really critical, but it's a pain to write. Nobody likes writing that. But I'm like, it's not hard for AI to write. And especially if you go like, hey, AI, can you do some research on my company? Here's the website. Just do a Bing search, look it up, and summarize what you learn about that company below. So it summarizes it. You're like, great. Here's an example job description of what this role looks like at a different company. Rewrite it knowing what you know about my company for this role with this one important thing to keep in mind. Bam, it will rewrite it. It will be at least 95% of the way there.
And
Right?
then,
If you're just having it take my company, take
right.
this other job description for us and rewrite it for my company. Based on what you know. Gosh, it's such a great 1-2 punch with AI.
And then take that forward because I did actually with a client go through this routine. You just mentioned, it ingested using its terms, basically their last hiring profile. Then it
Yep.
went against the marketing profile that was in the marketplace, combined the two. We then turned around and started doing the promotion and did it in different formats, one for LinkedIn, one for Instagram. So obviously big cost savings there. Made it more concise. We used the constraints of the different social media, telling it that, but we didn't stop there. We actually then went to the next step, which was what are the expectations of those people that are going to be interviewing for this job? In other words, what are the questions we should ask them? It kicked out that. We then went into, let's say they get hired and they have questions around, or they're about to get hired, they have questions around, how are you going to onboard me? Why wouldn't you do a 30, 60, 90-day plan with AI? Because it'll actually come back and say, based on the description and the role that you're talking about here, I'll now give you the 30, 60, 90-day plan. And if you'd like, this is the final thing we did and we stopped here. We said, what should their progress look like in 90 days? And on the one hand, somebody might say, well, that's a bit much. On the other hand, wouldn't you like to know expectations of the company you just went to work for, what they expect in the first 90 days? And then wouldn't you want to know, as the person getting hired, what are they going to do to create my success, right? What are they going to do to onboard me? So when I stopped at that point and looked at what work had been done in the past, it actually had been done, some of this work. It was never formalized. So when a new hire, new city came around, you start from scratch, right? Or some of this work isn't done. But I think that's the power, because once you do what we just talked about there for hiring once, then you just repeat. right? For the next one, all right, it's a different role. This isn't
Yep.
sales, it's now marketing.
Yep. It's something that scales really quick once you do it a few times and you tweak it because it'll make mistakes and you're like, okay, well, I don't know. I love running it because you can be like, okay, well, I asked it X and it gave me Y, but I really wanted Z.
Yeah.
So then you're like, okay, let's go back and test the prompt again and then run it again. Okay, closer. Okay, make a tweak, run it again. And now it's really close. You're like, okay, that's good. We're just going to start using that. I don't think people realize that with prompting sometimes. Like you actually have to test it, and if it doesn't give you back the result, you're like, okay, well, try it again. It's kind of like anything. You just got to try a few times, and usually you can get it down to where it's pretty good, and then you can use it over and over and over and over again. If you're hiring lots of sales reps in lots of different roles, well, you write it once, and then just change the inputs a little bit for each role, and it can really you can really run with it. But most people don't take the time to actually, go past version 1. I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, version 1's always 50 per 60% of what you wanted. It takes a couple more iterations to get to 90 to get
But
to
I
an
think what's
A-level output.
exciting is that, to get to 80 to 90,
Yeah.
if you're in HR, you can do this starting tomorrow.
Yeah.
You could really, do a YouTube video. I don't want to, suggest that it's incredibly easy beyond. You still have to do the YouTube video for 60 minutes. Learn how to do what we just mentioned. But the first question I'm finding is, does it do that? How can it do an onboarding plan? So you really have to just tell the non-technical person, be in HR sales or wherever, just start, right? Start with your job description, start with where you want to post it, start with what you think the onboarding could look like from the AI model, then stop, record what you just did, and then repeat. You don't need a developer to do what we just said. You can
Yep.
automate that. And you and I both know with a custom GPT, you can do that in the next 15 minutes. And that's, being conservative. You could probably do it in
Yeah.
less if you know how
Yeah.
to do it. And then put the person's logo on it from their company and it's theirs. But then at that point, again, once you start repeating it, the analytics will mean something later. If you do everything random, the analytics don't mean anything.
Now for sales, you've talked about how you're using AI and helping clients with AI coaching and training. How is that conversation going and how are you leveraging AI to enhance those things?
Well, there's some funny stories around people interviewing with AI sitting in the on the right side of their screen. So they're being coached. Now that's probably not right, but if you look at a right example could be if I'm in sales and I'm selling into insurance for the very first time, and I want to know what agents and brokers do for a living. So let's say I'm really green in this vertical, then I want to know in this case what challenges they're up against. In other words, compliance and regulations. Then I want to know, they keep mentioning CMS, it's not content management system, but actually all these regulations around, insurance and how you sell and market it. So I want to know all that. You can use an AI if done right to do that in real time, right? You're being coached before and then coming out of the call, if you record the call, you're going to be coached during and after possibly by the model. And when I say the model, the AI model of your choice. So I think that's what the exciting part was. We for many years, to Dave myself, quite a few years ago with enablement, sales enablement, we were building playbooks to do this thing.
Yeah.
Well, somebody had to create the playbook.
Yeah.
So as the company would say, who's going to pay that price? Is that marketing or sales or training? And I said, yes. And then we were off to the races, right? It depended on who had some cycles. So now you can do this stuff more in real time because I think we all know in sales, you're super motivated when you're in front of a real opportunity. The first question is it real? But then secondly, if I can become pretty well versed in a vertical that maybe I didn't sell into yesterday, I would use this for coaching. And then coming out of that, I think management. There's been technologies for a long time like Gong and now some others that are doing, real time coaching for somebody who's selling. In the end, you want people not to hawk product, you want them to sell solutions, right? It's fair to say. But building a playbook from scratch, and it's funny because I've got plenty of playbook examples where I'd look at it and I'm like, well, good, you did the playbook, bad that it's 30 pages. So who's going to read 30 pages and then get on the phone with the client? So
Yeah.
hopefully that helps, Dan, with that example because,
Yeah.
my discussion around selling into insurance is different than the financial sector, which is different than the high tech sector, the Wild West, as I like to call it. it's just very different, and you have to know the nuances.
I mean, man, I got light bulbs going off in my head, Craig. I'm like, wait a second. It never occurred to me. I'm like, a big part of sales training is having a professional seller listen to your calls and give you feedback. This is really the breakfast of champions when it comes to seller. It's feedback based on actual phone calls. The problem is listening to phone calls is very time consuming, which is why not nearly enough sellers get coaching, right? Because
Right.
it's time consuming to coach. It's time consuming to either do a ride along, like sitting and listening to the phone call live, or listening to it at 2x speed later on and taking notes on it. But AI can do it so fast. I'm like, I can imagine if you have like 20 reps and one person doing all the coaching and listening to phone calls and following up with reps, think about how much more effectively they can give feedback if they're literally just taking the transcript from certain calls and pumping it into a custom GPT that's already has instructions that says, "Hey, here's the selling model we use. Here's the grading criteria for following the model, and here's some of the company objectives we'd like sales reps to be hitting on. Graded accordingly with feedback." Bam, there it is. Rep gets instant feedback after that phone call. Then it can be sent to the person who's actually can look at it all and see the trends between phone calls and actually give good weekly advice on top of the per phone call advice AI gives. So you can actually layer on human coaching and feedback with AI coaching and feedback to really go hand in hand and give more rapid feedback so that people can actually improve at a much higher pace.
Yeah,
That's
and
exciting stuff because
it's
I remember in grade school, like you'd take the lesson, you go home, do homework, you turn it in the next day, it gets graded a couple of days later, you get it back. Think about the feedback loop. It's 3 days long on a math assignment. When I did college and when I finally went back to school and did my degree, I did a college algebra via a digital textbook. So the feedback was instant, and then it could break down my problem of where I went wrong step by step. And I was afraid of going back for college algebra, but that in that course, while it was hard for me, I finished it in 6 weeks. It went through really fast because of rapid feedback. I didn't have to wait to hear back what I'd done wrong or what step I'd missed. The textbook would tell me. We could do the same thing for sales reps and really scale a whole organization and get more people aligned to the selling objectives so much faster with just feedback. And I'm not even talking about like the coaching on the front end. You could probably do that too, like you just said.
well, what's interesting about this feedback, we encouraged a while back win-loss reporting, right, as a way of not just getting better at selling, but understanding the market, understanding what we were building, understanding what people were actually using. So we were using this, but it was all manual. So let's say you've automated that. So you don't have to do the ride along. I'm not saying you wouldn't want to do the ride along with your new team, but when you go from 5 to 50 reps, and have had a chance to do that, some great opportunity to do that, and then let's say that you go from 50 to 500 reps, and at the same time you're being told, all right, the alternate channel has to start selling too, and you've got hundreds of partners of which maybe 10% are producing, but you still have to service all of them. So now you're in a case where you're sitting on forecast review calls for a living, and you're wondering, when am I going to talk with a client about what it is they're going to buy or not buy? When am I going to, hear objections or maybe competitive seeding in these accounts where they're setting us up? When am I going to get to the good stuff? So now you've got that chance. And whether you're recording a call like we're doing right now, or you do it in person, you can always have your iPhone sitting there in front of you and just tell them, I'll do a better job with you coming out of this call if I record this. So imagine having this and then doing, not 5 ride-alongs that quarter, but now doing 5 ride-alongs that day. So imagine the potential. And when companies raise capital, I'll use that example, and they get excited about that IPO, and it's always a question of, how are you going to scale from 50 to 500 when you're already working a lot of hours a week? You really don't even know. You're going to throw bodies at it. You're thinking, well, now I got to go hire and train them. So think about scaling and think about not throwing bodies at the problem anymore, but throwing a better way of doing it. In other words, the process discipline. One of the things I think is meaningful to kind of round out the conversation here is, what if you can go from random acts, it's an old term, of enabling sales and marketing, to repeated, prove it out, save 60, 80 hours that first month per person, then go from there, institutionalize it, Where now the company's like, all right, when's that coming to my group? We're already kind of sort of using it, but we know there's a better way, not just better technology, but better process. So then you've now institutionalized it. If at that point you layer on the coaching that you and I just talked about,
Yeah.
now what you're saying is, all right, so the productivity gains in, but now we got to get better at launching products. New products that we built, products that we acquired. That's always fun. You acquire a company, everybody's excited. Then they realize the work. And so
Yeah.
how are you going to do M&A growth? So those are the use cases that I think if you could apply this to, you have the foundation in place, you have repeatable processes, you're coaching, then you can really get to that point to where you're optimizing, not based on just people, right? Sales, marketing, management, executive management, but the system. The system's going to come back. And it's starting to do that with some of the stuff I've been working with where it says it's memorizing the work I'm doing. And it'll come back and say, well, over here, you mentioned this. Now you're mentioning that. So it will learn with you. But you got to repeat processes. Otherwise, it's all just, random acts. So it's a bit of a maturity model, Dan.
Yeah.
I don't have the
Yeah. Yeah.
graphic yet. I've got it in my mind, but I don't have
Yeah.
it on paper. But I want to show this in a maturity model and then run through this with clients where they say, all right, we want to climb that starting with 3 to 5 people. We want to get to 500, but we're not going to do that until we have a sense for how best to leverage what we know the competition is going to leverage. And I slid in the competition there because that's what I'm hearing, right? We're not sure where to get started, but we're concerned that the competition, they are.
Step by step process. You don't. You
It
don't.
is.
You don't run before you walk, right? One of the last things I want to talk to you about is this idea of being an AI first company. What does that mean to you?
So another thing that I've heard on a podcast where the individual said, we used to be a product led company all about the product, and we know now it's not just about, building a better product. We have to have a better way of doing business. And if we can leverage AI to do that, it's not just going to be the well-heeled. There's a lot of conversation around AI and who's going to be able to leverage it. Is it just going to be the billion-dollar firms that have all the resources to make it right? I think it's going to be the SMBs. I think the small, medium-sized companies
Absolutely.
are going to, once they get on this, they're going to take off. And once they start repeating things using this step-by-step approach, right, they're going to have this competitive edge. And I think at that point, they're going to begin to scale with just a little bit less pain initially and a lot less pain later.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think it will be the SMBs, but it'll be a select few SMBs. I think a very few, because I feel like so many small businesses never really figure out they never really catch the vision for what excellent consistency looks like. Excellent, excellent consistency, like what Michael Gerber talked about in eMyth, right? Coming up with a world class business to be able to franchise it, even if you don't want to franchise, right?
Right.
How do you come up with a repeatable model on all the fronts of your business, from marketing to selling to fulfillment to finance and everything in between, right? How do you create a world class system? The small businesses that do figure that out become big businesses. But I think now they will not only come up with systems for it, they'll be AI driven systems that require way less capital, and are way more consistent than could ever have been before with human labor, because AI doesn't sleep and can execute pretty regularly the same way every time. So that's just an exciting proposition that we're going to have all these small businesses that are doing. I don't know. I feel like we'll have the first $1 billion solopreneur out there someday.
It'll be interesting to see because, historically, that's the whole name of the game is how far can the founders go with it? And, they're marketing, selling, and building the founding team of these companies with these great ideas. But then
Yep.
all of a sudden they would look to scale and they get to 5 people. In other words, they hire their 5 friends that they know can sell it. But it's from 5 to 50, where if you're an AI led, coming back to that term, AI first company, I'll use a quote, and I'm going to read this one verbatim. So this individual said, "We know AI is the future, and our executive team are saying get to it. However," and this person said, "however, there's a big however because we have questions, we have concerns, we don't know the market. And oh, by the way, we're already working, weeks that aren't 40 hours, beyond 40 hours. So how are they going to I think it's if the company is thinking AI first, they're thinking before we throw again people and bodies at a problem, let's look at how can we make our life easier. And then once we do that, how can we repeat it? You're still going to bring people in, right? But when you bring them in,
Yeah.
they're probably going to be fairly AI savvy. Think fast forward now 2 years, people are going to be pretty AI savvy. You'll say AI super prompting, they'll say, of course. There'll probably be tools to do it for us at that point, Dan.
Oh yeah.
But at least you'll be in a competitive position right now to do it better. But the AI first came from a podcast where I'm thinking to myself, if I'm always thinking about how I could do this, not with people, and let's face it, we burned some people out over the years where you're scaling these companies, revenue's going up, but people are burning out. How can we use AI to prevent that from happening? And profitable revenue versus revenue. There's a lot of big sort of business questions that I think can be asked, but only if the company thinks about this. It's not just somebody in the tech group or somebody in the marketing group thinking about it.
I know the future of AI is exciting, but even if we don't get to the future of AI where AI can actually break down problems into all its components and actually become an agent. A lot of people talk about AI agents, and I think it's really silly because AI is not capable of being an agent at all yet. It doesn't have the critical thinking skills to break a project down into tasks, which is fine with me because I can break it down into tasks and then it's actually really good at delivering the tasks if you break it down for it. Right now it's not, it can't do it. It's why agents are a silly conversation because you can rig it to do it, but it doesn't do it naturally. Even if that never comes, because they're working on that. The OpenAI is gonna hopefully the next version can actually think through complex projects. But even if they don't, the AI we have will still get us to where all the things we're talking about and helping companies upscale and go farther than they've ever been able to go before. We could do with the current tech. They could stop developing AI and ChatGPT 4.0 or Gemini or whatever your favorite model is can deliver on these promises already. That's the exciting part is we haven't even really begun to really utilize what's currently there for selling, for marketing, for HR, for any type of any part of business. It can do way more than we think. And we're still just in the jungle exploring, figuring out what it's capable of, and new use cases are popping up a little bit here, a little bit there that will become the best practices next year or the years to come. But we know AI is probably going to get better. So pretty soon, you're right. You won't need a super prompt. It will prompt you.
It'll prompt
you will be
you
like, "What's the problem?" And then it'll pull the information it needs out of it, and then it'll take off and go do it.
But I think it's important to sort of land on in this conversation a practical point, and that is it's still the discipline behind all of this, and that's
For
why
sure.
that quote about are you going to lose your job to AI? No, but you're going to probably potentially, I should say, look to lose it to somebody who knows AI and has discipline. And so you can go out to YouTube right now and find plenty of things, right? Some of the stuff you've done and get going. But I think ultimately, if this is a company thing and it's a AI company first thing, I think what will happen is they'll identify the greatest pain point. To your point earlier,
Yep.
it's most likely going to be a customer facing role. In other words, a role that makes money for us or keeps money for us, and they're going to start giving them time back in their day. And then ultimately, they're going to start building up that maturity model. And I think the maturity model, people don't tend to like that term, but I like the term because it builds off each other. But you got to put the stake in the ground and get started
That's right.
now. Our biggest offering right now is just getting started with AI. Growth IQ is my company. And what's been interesting about these conversations is they start at the same point. Here are my concerns. Here are my questions. What do you think? And it's early days. You mentioned Pioneer in our prep call. It's early days, but I think with some pretty well-heeled companies, it's not early days. I think they're well into it, and they're going to be the first to kind of cut their teeth. But they also have big Titanic-sized ships. I shouldn't use Titanic as the boat name, but they have these big ships that they've got to turn around. I think the small mid-sized companies have a real shot here at a differentiator that they hadn't had in the past. I do.
No, they have less to lose, right? And some big companies have leveraged AI and they're getting sued. So the big companies have more to lose, so they got to be more cautious. The small companies do not have to be as cautious and can leverage the new things before they're tried and true. And that's the exciting part about being small versus big. So, Craig, this has been a fantastic conversation. Where can people go to learn more about what you're doing? I know you're about to launch or have launched recently a podcast of your own on AI. Is that right?
Yeah, we're gonna get going on the podcast circuit. You're my first to sort of delve into this topic. We've been doing the topic for about 20 years, enablement of sales, but now it's the AI driven enablement of sales. But growthiq.ai on the site, some of the quotes that I mentioned from clients, some of the questions that clients have, and then we're going to have coming off of that, further discussions on how companies are maturing. So as they go to being foundational with AI to doing institutionalized with AI, we're going to start sharing those stories, Dan. I hope that it'll become a community in which, no different than the Revenue Enablement Society and some of these other communities out there, where we all kind of brainstorm together. Small companies, big enterprise companies, because this market's going to accelerate at a faster and faster pace. So it's an exciting time to sort of be in and around this, and that's where growthiq.ai, that website's gonna hopefully make its mark.
So if you're on the sales side or working on sales enablement or just need to better understand how to better collaborate with sales, and especially in this AI driven world, go check out Craig and what he's doing over with his new podcast there. Thank you for listening. If this has been fascinating to you, and I'd love to hear from you, please leave a review on any of the podcast apps where you're listening to this at, and give it the star rating that you think it's worth. If you're listening on YouTube, then give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, say hey, or find me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/digital marketing Dan. I love it when people reach out and say they liked an episode and tell me a little bit about what they liked or what they'd like to hear about. So engage with me, find me out there. I wish there was ways to do that better on a podcast, but limited to reviews for now. So thank you for listening. Until next time.